All right. Hey, everyone. So, live again this evening. And this time we're going to look at Adobe Animate. Um, I've done some stuff in Animate on these streams before, and I've done some After Effects. And last week we did some InDesign. And I'm bringing it back to Animate now, because Animate is one of my favorite applications, because there's so much you can do with it. It's absolutely wonderful. And yeah, micro interactions are cool. They don't take, normally a whole lot of time to put together, though, of course, you can spend hours and hours refining them. I've got some ideas on what I might want to do for this evening. So what we're going to do is just kind of like start out and sort of see how it goes. I've already prepared a document here. And it's just the standard kind of like HD size from the menu. So if you're not used to Animate, when you go to create a new file, you'll be presented with a bunch of presets. And for something like this, it doesn't really matter that much what you choose. But yeah, I chose this HD setting here. It's just 1280 by 720, pretty standard. And the frame rate on this, I changed it to 30. But it can be 24, 30, any of those things work. All right. So what I'm thinking for this animation is, I always like it when things kind of just have a little reaction to, a hover or proximity kind of thing. So you could have like a toggle switch, which toggle switches are kind of overdone. Buttons, all sorts of stuff where, you get the mouse cursor over there or close to it and it'll start reacting in some way. It'll start animating. Something will change about it. And then if you move the cursor away or if you enact upon the thing, then, something else is going to happen, right? So what we want to do is just create that little micro interaction that kind of tells the user that, hey, I'm an active element in this experience. And, if you, if you interact with me, something's going to happen. So I think what I'm going to do, instead of making like I said, a toggle switch is really overdone, but they're really fun to make because they're just like, that satisfying sort of sliding back and forth kind of thing. So I'm going to make more of a, not so much a toggle switch, but, something along the same lines, but it's going to be more vertical, so more portrait than landscape, more vertical than horizontal. And probably the first thing I want to do for this is choose the rectangle tool. Or you could always choose the rectangle primitive tool. The main difference here inside of Animate is that with the rectangle primitive tool, you're able to edit the different options even after the object is created. So if I were to go ahead and, create this with the rectangle tool, I'd have to make sure that I got those rounded corners exactly like I want them straight off. But with the rectangle primitive, I can actually have the flexibility of adjusting those later on. There are a couple things I want to change first, though, in my properties here. So for my fill, let's go ahead and just make this, I don't know, just a basic gray color for now. And the stroke will be, thinking a dark blue. Something like that. Let's make the stroke size 4. Style is fine, width's fine. I'm not going to worry about any of that stuff. Hinting's always nice to turn on because then if things go weird, it'll try to even out those particular corners and roundedness for you on your stroke. So I'm going to keep that. And I'm not going to be scaling this thing really. So I'm just going to keep this as normal for now. These different end options and miter options and things like that are just fine. And for rectangle options, I'm going to just start with a big fat 20. But again, we'll see how it goes with the rectangle primitive, I have the ability to adjust that later. So another thing I want to do is, before I start drawing this, check my grid and my snapping. So I want to make this pretty precise. Let's go ahead and show that grid. It's a little tiny right now. Let's go to View, Grid, Edit Grid. And that's going to allow me to make some adjustments to this. I'm going to have my grid blocks at 30. It's going to make them nice and big. And I also want to check to make sure snapping is on snap to grid, which it already is. Perfect. Usually I like to keep things inside of Animate with snap to grid, and really all my snapping options enabled, because I like things to be really precise. So I come from mostly a UI development or UI design background. A lot of development along with that, and precision matters quite a bit when you're doing that stuff. It doesn't matter so much when you're actually just doing stuff in Animate. A lot of people just freeform draw, especially with character animation. But when you're doing something like this, it's more of a UI, UX, motion graphics kind of thing. It's a little bit different. So all I'm going to do here is sort of visualize how big I might want that toggle to be. And I think that's pretty good. So we can see here, this is 180 by 300. However, since we are creating this inside of Adobe Animate, it works very similar to something like Illustrator, that everything's in vector. You can use bitmap images inside of Animate, but anything you create in Animate natively with these tools is by default going to be vector objects. So that's why we get fill and stroke and all the rest of this. You can see the little corner bits here. And of course, I can now go ahead and change this through my object properties. And I do want to change it because 20 isn't what I'm looking for at all. 60, no. 80, getting there. You know, we got 180 by 300. 180 is probably going to get me there pretty good. Yep. All right. So now we have a nice kind of slick oval here. We've got enough room for a little toggle to go back and forth. That's pretty good. All right. So the next thing I need to do is to create some additional elements. And inside of Animate, anything that's going to be animated should exist on its own layer. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer right on top of that in the timeline. And let's actually go to 100% here so I can see everything really good. I don't care so much about the stage size in a document like this because I'm just creating an asset to be used elsewhere. This is just a canvas that I'm working with right now. It's not a big deal. All right. So this first layer, I'm going to double click and rename this. Layer 2. Just call that slider. We want to create with the oval tool. Something like that, but a little bit smaller because I want it to show. So I'm going to lock the width and the height. Pull that down a little bit. I'm actually going to get rid of this stroke altogether here. And let's change the fill. We'll just make it that dark color right now. You can always change that later on. All right. So we got the beginnings of our little slider. I actually think the stroke here can be a bit better. And also, I'm going to change the color to match this object here before we move on. Taking it up to 6 is okay, but 8 is actually a bit better. Yeah, That's fine. And we just make these little adjustments as we go. Of course, something we could always do is use the alignment panel and align these things together. So if we wanted to align them both to the center of the stage, there we go. Now they're perfectly aligned. I see there's a few people here watching. Welcome. If you have any questions or anything you might want to ask at all in the chat, or maybe you've used Animate before for stuff like this, feel free to chat away. I do monitor the chat on these. All right. So my idea for this is that when the user kind of like gets near the toggle switch, at first it looks like a normal toggle, except that it's, rotated a bit. But I want it to actually like have some kind of interaction where you see it like boiling is the initial thought that I had. So I don't know exactly how we'll do that. We'll use something, some tools inside of Animate to create that motion. All right, let's have a look. So the first thing I want to do too, before we move on to that, is we do need to put some additional effects on here, because right now things are looking pretty flat, which of course is fine if you're dealing with flat UI and so forth. And actually we can turn this grid off at this time too. We don't need to look at that. So what I want to do is probably create both of these objects as individual movie clip symbol instances. So when I create them as movie clip symbols, what they're going to do is it's going to allow me to do all sorts of stuff in terms of filters and effects. And, if I wanted to make this interactive down the road, I could give it an instance name and then write code so that somebody could actually interact with it. I'm not going to do that tonight because it's going to take way too long. And actually, who knows if I'll get this finished tonight. I may have to continue it some other time, but I think it's a good start here. So I'm going to select that object. This is my inside bit that everything rests in. Let's go ahead, go to Modify, Convert to Symbol. I'm going to make this, again, a movie clip symbol. Change that registration point to the very center. And let's just call this slider. There we go. Now it's a movie clip. And I can do additional things to it at this point, like put filters on it. So let's go ahead and add a filter. And I'm thinking a drop shadow here might work out well. And maybe even some kind of an inner glow or an inner shadow. Let's see. I want it to be fairly subtle. Which that is not. Of course, I've got the quality on low, which ain't great. Let's change that. Taking that strength down is going to help me too. Pulling up the blur. And I should really lock my blur here. I neglected to do that, so I gotta hit them both. But that's looking like it's got a bit more dimension to it now, right? And that's what we want. We want it to look like it's a bit tangible. Let's go ahead and add another filter on there. Maybe do a glow. And the glow itself is going to be just this background color. I'm going to bump the quality up to high once again. Pull blur X and blur Y together. just to give it something of a glow so it looks like it's somewhere, right? It exists in something, like it's not just floating there. So this gives it a bit of grounding as we go through, and hopefully this is coming across pretty well in the video. If I zoom in, you can probably see it a bit better. So a little combination there, a couple different filters. It makes a really big difference. Actually, the strength here. Let's go ahead and add another drop shadow on there. And also inside of Animate, you can treat filters like layers. So you can move them around the stack, and they do change depending on that sort of thing. So I'm going to make this again an inner shadow. Let's offset that a bit more. So what I'm trying to do is just get a little more bit of a shadow in there. I like what's going on otherwise, but I think you could add a little more right there. There we go. Something like that. Although it's a little tricky because we've got this, my strokes kind of getting lost a bit there, you know? But what can you do? We can always go back and make adjustments later because all of these different filters that I put on here are all live. So just like in Photoshop with like smart objects and smart filters, you can always go back and change them. So we are getting along. Perfect. Now I'm thinking this is a little too much. I'm going to take it back down a little bit. All right. All right. So this guy right here, this slider, I'm going to make this a movie clip symbol as well. So I'm going to select it, modify, convert to symbol. And, oh yeah, this is called the slider. I called the other one slider by mistake. So let's go and change that. If you ever need to change anything, you just go to your project library. Here you see slider, which it isn't. I'm going to just call this inside or inner or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't really matter. You just can't have two things in your library named the same exact thing. All right. So now I'm going to grab the slider once again. Modify, convert to symbol, slider. And make sure it's a movie clip symbol, especially if you want to make this interactive later on. Hugely important. If it's not a movie clip symbol, you won't be able to put an instance name on there. Unless it's a button symbol, which you can also put an instance name on, but it doesn't give you the amount of flexibility that we're looking for this, especially in terms of, as mentioned, that kind of boiling look that we're going for. All right, so now that I've got this guy as a symbol instance, I can add filters to him too. And, you know, I've always felt weird about using bevel, especially in Photoshop, because back when I was first learning Photoshop for like web design and things like that, and you know, I mean, Macromedia Fireworks was pretty big on this too when it comes to bevel and bevel abuse. So I'm always really careful with bevel because it's really easy to overuse, and probably as soon as I turn it on, it's gonna look terrible. But of course, we'll make it look nice. So let's put that bevel on, and yeah, looks pretty bad, right? So let's take that blur up a little bit. Don't want to tweak distance too much. Strength can definitely go down a bit. Angle's fine. The highlight, you know, always having a bright white highlight or a, you know, black drop shadow is probably not always the best thing. You can always change these here. So I'm gonna Oops, that's a little too much. I just changed the shadow. Shadow does have to be black, probably. The highlight. Yeah, that's pretty good. And I can also put a little glow on here too, because as you can see, this bit right here kind of gets lost inside of there. Let's pop this guy up. You can really see him good. And yeah, it gets lost a little bit. So filters are a great way to fix that. A little bit more. And always bump it up to at least medium. But high is sometimes pretty good too. All right. So we're starting to look pretty good in terms of our static assets, right? Oh, hey, Hannah. Thank you. Nice to see you this evening. Yeah, something I've done, so I started teaching for the university. Our fall semester started on Monday. So in my studio here, I've got both a Windows machine, which I'm using right now, and I've also got a MacBook Pro, and I've got a couple different displays. And over the summer, really, I've been trying to figure out like the best placement for all this stuff so I can easily switch to use my MacBook Pro or my Windows machine whenever I, decide to use one over the other. And it's been a lot of like moving monitors around and like switching things around that way. It's been kind of a pain. But I think I've got the solution now where I've got the placement just right. So no matter what I'm actually doing, it'll work. It's easy. I can just like plug in my MacBook Pro and just go on this machine. If I'm using my Windows stuff, I got these two going on, and it's going to work out just fine. So I'm pretty pleased about that. I think I finalized most of that today, and it's going to help with these live streams too, because then I can use whatever I need to. Yeah. Yeah, motion's great. And I've done a couple little After Effects things too on this live stream. I know Animate a lot better than I do know After Effects, but I know there's a lot more people on here that know After Effects better, so I think it kind of balances out. All right. So let's see. What do we want to do next? So I got this guy going. I guess it's time to actually make a little bit of animation happen. And it is... All right, so we've been going for about 23 minutes. So that's pretty good. 23 minutes of work to get this little guy going. Not too bad. And odd number there, 137. That's not going to do it for me. I'm going to go to 120. I just can't abide by odd numbered things. It's always like weird for me. All right. So let's see. We did divide both of these assets up into their own layers. So you can see if I select my slider, that layer gets selected. And if I select this background element, this inner element, the inside layer gets selected. Now, the inside layer, we're not really doing anything with that right now. So I'm going to lock it down so I don't mess with it. And let's go out to just, I don't know. Let's go out to frame 50 here. So if you're not used to Animate, Animate is very frame-centric with its timeline. So these are the frame numbers here. You got 5 frames, 10 frames, 15 frames, 30 frames, and 30 frames equals 1 second. We get a little marker there. Because on our document properties, we have our FPS settings to 30 frames per second, or FPS. So that means at 60 frames, we're going to have 2 seconds of animation. And at 30, we get 1. So I'm going to just go out to 50, just because that's what fits in my timeline view right here. And what I want to do is just fill this with frames, because right now, we actually can't scrub anywhere. This is the playhead, this little blue thing. And since we only have 1 frame of content, we can't scrub. So I need to add more frames in order to move that around. So I'm going to go out to frame 50. And then right here, if we kind of long press on that, we get the ability to select, do we want to insert a keyframe, a blank keyframe, which is basically an empty keyframe, meaning there's like no content on that layer, or a frame. And this will create a frame span. So I want to create a frame span on both of these layers all the way out to frame 50. And there we go. So now I can scrub this guy around, and we actually have, a workable timeline here. I can create motion. So the first thing I'm going to do is go out to somewhere like 20, because we want this to rest a bit first, right? And right here, let's go ahead and insert a keyframe. That is going to duplicate the previous keyframe. So it's going to stay right there from frame 1 to frame 20. And then I want it to slide up. I'm going to insert another keyframe there. And then just use my arrow keys to slide that guy up there until he's right about there. And there we go. So already we've got our little toggle switch, right? And there we go. We're done. Great job, everyone. Now, so this is like a basic frame by frame kind of thing, right? This is how generally like you interact with a toggle switch, on the web or something. And this is the kind of thing you get. It's like 2 states, and it just goes back and forth between the 2. Of course, with Animate, we have full control over what we want to do, how we want to do it, what sort of easing we want to apply to it, and all sorts of things like that. So to do that, to apply some sort of a tween to this, since this is if we select this object here, oops, I got it locked down. So if we select this, we can see it's a movie clip symbol instance. And with a movie clip symbol instance, what you can do is you can create a classic tween or a motion tween. And they're both a little bit different. I'm just going to use a classic tween for this. I kind of prefer them a little bit in situations like this. If I need to apply some sort of easing algorithm, I kind of prefer a classic tween over a motion tween. If I need to use like motion paths or do anything, with the graph editor, the motion editor, or anything, sort of akin to After Effects. In that case, I would use a motion tween. But I want to keep this sort of on the timeline in the properties panel. So I'm going to right click between these 2 keyframes on that layer. And I've got all sorts of choices up here. I can create my classic tween. I can create a motion tween. And you'll notice is also create shape tween, which is disabled because I don't have a shape here. It's a movie clip symbol instance and not a shape. You can only create shape tweens with shapes. So I'm going to create classic tween. And there we go. We can already see that motion taking place. And things have changed inside of my timeline here. And let's go ahead and set our loop options. So I'm going to toggle looping in my timeline. And I'm going to change my loop markers to extend across both of these and hit play. All right. So we got a little bit of motion here. And it's pretty good. But it can be a lot better. So let's pause it. As you notice right now, it's super linear. Like every single frame, it's moving at the exact same pace, right? So from here to here to here, it's moving that exact same amount of pixels across the screen. And it's completely unnatural. So normally what's going to happen is it's either going to, like, if you think about, and I always try to think about these things when it comes to, like, you know, actual tactile interactions. Like if this was a real switch that I was pushing with my finger, like how would it work? And I'm thinking, like, normally it would have like a little bit of resistance at first and then click into place in a nice, like, satisfying way. So for that, I would use something like a little ease in. What that's going to do is it's going to change this so it's not just a step-by-step linear kind of thing. It's got a little resistance at first. It's slower at first, and then it, you know, clicks in. That's exactly what I want to have happen. So to do anything with this tween I just created, all I need to do is select any of these frames that are on the tween. Any one will work. And then in my frame properties in the properties panel, I've got my effects here. And right now we're using a classic ease. And if I click on that, we can see, just like we saw when we were previewing it, that it's a super straight line, just from point A to point B, super boring, super unrealistic. You know, nobody's going to be wowed by that. As I mentioned, we want it to ease in. We want a little resistance at first, a little slowdown, and then have it click in. So I'm going to choose ease in. And we can see on this graph here and all these different algorithms that are listed on the side that we can make some choices around this. So quad actually looks pretty good. You've got that ease at the beginning and then clicks in, right? Cubic is a little more ease. You got quart, which is even more exaggerated. And then quint, you got sine, back, which is, you know, super exaggerated. Circ, which is a nice curve. Then you have things like bounce and elastic, which, while they are kind of fun, like for instance, if I double click on this, you know, bounce, you get a little bounce first. That's kind of fun, but it's not really applicable in this situation. So we want to choose something like, I'm going to think quart might work for this. So I'm going to double click on that. And if we preview, we can see at the beginning here, it's almost static, this entire first half of the actual tween, and then it slides into place. So let's go ahead and preview that. Let's give it a little more breathing room. That's pretty good. All right. So we got our motion down, but we still don't have a micro interaction that's working with this. This is just a simple UI element. And even though it looks nice and, you know, it feels good, behaves nice, we still need to create that micro interaction bit. So as I mentioned, I'm thinking when the user gets near it, that it starts to kind of boil. And that might not be the best word to use, but it's kind of what started my thoughts around this. And I'm going to go ahead and give myself a little more breathing room here. I'm going to add some more frames in. So we have 3 frames of animation. I'm going to want to select this frame span that we just created and just shift it back over here a little bit. Maybe at the 2-second mark, that's where it lives. Because I want to have something happen right here. So you can think, you know, and lots of times people will create like a little kind of like indicator of like either a touch point or a cursor that moves toward things when they're demonstrating these type of micro interactions and micro animations. But yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to make the micro animation. So there's kind of 2 ways we could go about this in terms of this boiling thing, right? And I'm kind of thinking that we use the background object here, because the background is actually, this is actually, what would you say? It's a little dull right now, right? So if we hover our mouse over this, maybe it just starts like filling up with some kind of liquid, right? And just kind of like wavering. So what I'm going to do for that, how should I approach this? There's a couple of ways we could do this, right? What I think I'm going to do is enter into this object right here. So I've got my movie clip symbol selected right now. I'm going to double click on there, and then I can get a hold of my rectangle primitive again. You can see I'm inside that movie clip symbol up here, and I can copy that. Control C, Command C, and then if I create a new layer, rename it Boil, and I don't know, maybe at the 1 second marker, let's go ahead and throw in a blank keyframe. And it's blank, it's empty, so I can paste anything in there I want. Let's go ahead and paste in place. And I'm not sure where that's going to paste in, so let's go ahead and fit in window. There it is. It's right up there. And you can see Animate is trying to align to my grid, which isn't exactly what I want. What I want is it for it to be centered. So again, I can go to my line panel, center that to the stage, since I know that everything else is centered to the stage at this point. Sweet. All right, so it doesn't look very much different. If I toggle the visibility on and off, we can see I've got my flat object without any filters. And then underneath there, of course, is my inside object. And what I want to do is now actually create a little bit of animation inside of this. And I'm thinking for this, gosh, there's so many different ways you could go about this. But I'm going to do some basic kind of shape tween stuff, I think. First thing I'm going to do, let's go ahead and make that visible again. Now, I never want this object to actually reach the top. I want it to boil up to like this point here, just to indicate like, hey, you know, if you do something, it's pointing in that direction. It's indicating that something's going to happen there. And of course, we know the little guy's going to go flip, and he's going to switch up there, right? So I only want him to go up to here, so I don't need all that access. And right now, if I select this, this is a rectangle primitive. I don't care about the stroke. Let's get rid of that. Additionally, I do not need this to be a rectangle primitive anymore. So I want to actually break this apart. And you can do that in a number of ways. There's Control or Command B, or you can choose Modify, Break Apart. And there we go. You can see that this is now a shape. And because it's a shape, if I have everything else locked down, I can make a selection here and delete it. And you can see the difference here. I've got my shape, and then I've got the object in the background. And I think this is going to work out really nicely. So let's go ahead and change the color of this fill, because I don't want it to be the same gray as the background. That doesn't make any sense. I want to make it kind of colorful, actually. Let's make it purple. I honestly don't use enough color in most of my designs. I'm very color averse. So there we go. There's some color. And, you know, it doesn't look all that great right now. However, what we can do is actually add a filter to this entire layer. So if I select the layer itself, I can add a filter, but I can also add a blend mode. So if you're used to using blend modes in other applications like Photoshop, Illustrator and so forth. You know, Adobe XD has blend modes now. You can use blend modes inside of Animate as well. And if you have advanced layers enabled, which is always enabled by default now, you're able to actually put blend modes on individual layers, which applies to everything inside the layer, which is pretty cool. So look at all these blend modes. Let's see. Check out multiply. Multiply is pretty good. Multiply is probably my go-to for any kind of blend mode. I always try that first. Overlay is one that I look at a lot too. Overlay is pretty nice. Got hard light, which is sometimes pretty fun. And these are all doing mostly the same thing here. I don't know, maybe I'll just choose multiply just because it's dark. Well, I don't want it to be darker though. The whole point of this is to use some color. So let's use some color. I'm going to go ahead and do a hard light. Perfect. All right. Nice and colorful. And the cool thing about this, of course, is we can still see, you know, all the filters that are applied to the objects beneath, right? All right. Now I'm thinking, do I want my boiling bits to be up top so it covers the thumb too? I'm not sure. I'm going to keep them down at the bottom first. We'll figure that out later. So a couple of additional things here. Of course, I'm dealing with vectors, so I can be fairly precise with this stuff with the sub selection tool. So let's go in here and just kind of shift these little points around. Just so it's not as thick. And I am really just using my arrow keys on my keyboard here to do this. All right, so that's pretty good. We could, of course, take more time with it if we want. You know what else we could do, which might work, is we could actually separate out the object that we use for our inside bits. We could separate that out into both stroke and path as separate entities, separate layers, and then put this fill that's being boiled within it, which might be fun. Lots of different options. There we go. All right. So to actually create this, gosh, you know, we could use a mask too. There's so many different ways to do this. But I'm going to just use a basic shape tween to start and see how that works out. So this is actually the end result of what we got going on, mostly. I do want to add a little variance to it. So I'm going to pull that down a bit. Let's go right about there. We're going to duplicate that keyframe. Then over here, before it all comes together, what I want to do is have that drain. So let's drain it. I think I'm going to use my sub selection tool for that. This is going to go pretty fast, so you don't have to be like super, super, what's the word? Precise about what you're doing here, right? So basically I'm creating steps on each of these. Uh-oh. Looks like I'm having some issues with my live stream. I hope not. I'm not sure where I got that message. It says my video quality is poor. So we may need to cut this back. I hope not, because this is going pretty good. If we do have to cut it back, what I'm going to do is continue with this next week. So I'm just trying to see if my stream's going to end here. Let's see. Maybe I'll check my internet connectivity. I mean, everything seems okay. I'm not sure why Behance is telling me there's a problem. Yeah, everything looks okay. So I'm going to keep going. I'm curious, anybody in the chat, have you seen any anything weird with my stream? Guys, everything seems to be A-okay. All right. Yeah, I just got a message from the dashboard that Behance gives us here. Just letting me know. It's telling me my stream quality isn't good, which is weird. All right, so back to this. What I'm doing basically is, taking each of these in turn. And we're going to suck this liquid down as far as we can go here. We can do this a number of different ways, of course. I'm going to start deleting nodes from my object here. Yeah, let's get rid of that one too. Oops, not both of them. Let's see. That's better. And if you don't know, Animate has some really great ways of manipulating vectors just with the normal selection tool. Like if you don't have anything selected, and it'd be better to show right here. I've done it a couple times so far. Like we can see here, there's this like 1 point. I can just take that and bump it over. As long as nothing's selected. I can move this stuff around. It's very, very flexible. All right. So we got basic kind of frame by frame animation going on here, which of course isn't what we want. We're going to add some shape tweens to this. Just as soon as I finish that off. Insert a blank keyframe right here. And then we don't have anything else going on. It's empty, right? So I'm going to select all these frame spans. Actually, we're going to have to start out like right there. Select all the frame spans, right click, and choose Create Shape Tween. As you can see, the Animate is making its own decisions about how exactly to tween some of this stuff. It's such a pain sometimes. So whenever you're dealing with complex shapes inside of Animate, especially if the vector points go wacky, what can happen is stuff like this, where it just starts, it doesn't know what to do with itself, and it tries to map different anchors to other spots. So what you can do for that is, well, let's actually finish this up first before we get into all that, right? I'm going to remove the shape tween from there because it's not necessary. All right, well, Behance is saying my video quality is good now, so I think everything's still going pretty well. Right on. Okay. So we need to actually fill this guy up too. So what I'm going to do is just select everything that I did right here. And I'm going to copy all these frames. Well, I'm not going to do that. That's lazy. It's a little lazy. Let's duplicate that. Then we're going to step backwards. Once again. And see, something like that we can fill up like real good with a simple shape tween right here. There we go. And down here on this initial keyframe, I kind of started off at the bottom, right? So, I mean, something we could always do is just select the stupid thing like this. Delete that content. Then really just create a shape tween. And you can see it happens again because our anchor points are weird. All right, so at this point, we need to go ahead and actually go in and give this guy some further direction. So for this, I'm going to actually hide my slider. And what I want to do is place different points on this object. And I'm thinking 4 points might be okay. I hope it is. So what I'm going to do is insert some shape hints. And this allows us to guide the shape tween transformation as we go through here. So I'm going to start off with this first keyframe. I want to choose insert. No. Modify. Timeline. Here we go. Modify shape, add shape hint. So there's A. I'm going to put A over here. Insert. No, modify. Timeline. Or shape, rather. So it's Control or Command Shift H. So I'm going to use that from now on. And you'll notice they kind of go alphabetically. Oops. Don't need that one. Let's remove hint. D and E is going to go there. All right, so we go A, B, and actually C should go right there. D, E. So we're going clockwise, right? A, B, C, D, E. So what we get is at this keyframe here, we have to match up and say like where these different points of the shape are at this time. So E is down there. Let's stick E over there. Here's D, C, B, and A. Looks like D's having some issues here. Let's turn off our snapping. That's under the View menu. I like to edit my snapping and just turn them all off from this little menu here. It's easier than goofing around. I think D is actually off of the shape. Let's put D back up there. Well, D's got some issues, but it might be okay. Let's leave him be. If he wants to be like that, what are we going to do? It looks like that did not do a darn thing, which is disappointing. Yeah, so it's keeping the shape pretty well, but it looks like what I need to do is just add an additional keyframe in the middle here just to compensate. And shape tweens are always the hardest to do because of stuff like this, right? But shape tweens, you know, they can be the funnest to use too because you can modify all sorts of different properties. So not only can you modify the different points like this and the constraints of your shape, but you can actually go through. Gosh, it's made a lot of little anchor points here for me. Well, it's looking a little better. Okay. Not perfect, but better. And we'll do something similar here. Gosh, look at that. That is a mess. So we definitely need some shape hints here. I'm going to go ahead and insert some more. Modify shape. Add shape hint. So my preference when using Animate for things like this is to never have to use a shape hint, because they're a real pain sometimes to use. So I'm kind of thinking now, in hindsight, as I'm going through this, I should have just like done something with a mask and just masked up some like bubbly liquid. But what are you going to do? The shape hints just are not working out for me today, which is really unfortunate. One trick, of course, to anything like this, so you take down the opacity. So if I go to my color effects alpha, just take down the opacity. And no one will know because they can't see it as well. That's actually really cheap. I shouldn't do that. All right, let's see how things look right now. Because we're getting on in time. It's 8 o'clock my time. Should be 7 o'clock Pacific. Let's take this out for a bird's eye view. So we've got our little toggle switch. When somebody hovers near it, it fills up. And then the idea here is it just kind of waits. It's filled up, it waits. And then once they click on it, what'll happen is it'll drain back down and the toggle switch will go like that. Now, it could always drain first, but you know, I'm kind of thinking like, you know, it doesn't necessarily need to happen sequentially, right? I like it inside of motion design when you've got things that sort of overlap and interact with each other. And you know what? I hate this. The boiling that I've got going on here, we can do this so much better. Let's delete that. I'm going to add a new layer. As I'm going through here, I'm like, the masking was definitely the way to go. So what we're going to do is do it the masking way. Paste in place again. And you know, I mean, whatever. This is the creative process, right? You have to deal with this stuff. I'm going to name this boil mask because this shape is going to serve as my mask. Now, when I deal with masks, what I like to do is actually turn the color all this green, because this tells me like, hey, this does not belong. It is something else. And this is my mask. So there we go. There's my mask. I need to add another layer, which is actually going to contain the liquid that I want to boil. And for that, I'm going to use the rectangle tool. Grab that purple color again. And for this, we can be super sloppy. Look at that. No need to be precise. What I'm going to do is actually, as we go through here, now if we start this out at 1, insert a keyframe there and hold down Alt or Option to send that up top. Then I want this to churn up there for a little bit. And then hold. And then suck back down. Again, Alt or Option. There we go. So you might be like, how's that any better than the shape with the shape hints, right? But it actually is going to be, I promise. Once we make this boil mask layer an actual mask. So to do that, I select the boil mask layer, I right click, and I choose mask. And what happens is the shape that I had over there in the boil mask layer becomes a masking object, which then shows anything that's directly beneath it. And layer 5, which is my boil, is actually what's going to, show through the mask. And right now, you can kind of see how that's working, but I don't have a lot of things going on yet. We're going to have it hold right there. So I need a shape tween here. I need shape tweens across here. Now you can see how the mask works, right? So we are going to have that fill up. Let me check it for timing. And again, we can, of course, manipulate this. Now, whenever you're manipulating the shape that is being masked, you have to disable the mask temporarily. I just want to give a bit of waviness to this until it comes to a standstill right there. Then here, when you click on it, I want it to just sort of start sucking down. Maybe I should make that a little more extreme. Let's lock it. All right, that's pretty good. So what I also want to do is ease out on this guy right here. I'm going to select this big long frame span, classic ease, ease out, don't want bounce. Let's do cubic ease out. So you can see it fills up really fast. If I turn on my looping again, I guess it's not so much of a boil, it's more of a filling up. And then when we go out, it just kind of drains out. So you can see already that's a lot quicker than what I was doing with the shape tween, and it just looks a lot better. So let's go ahead and apply a layer effect to this as well. Blend mode. It's got a nice little spring to it at the end there. It's not exactly boiling, but it's, you know, we could put a couple little bubbles coming up out of that, and then it certainly would be. So I'm thinking, stop that. I'm thinking what we do is, let's do the whole thing. I'm thinking I'm probably gonna call it for tonight, and we'll do a part 2 of this, where we actually make this, you know, an actual interactive slider with the little micro animation. And then we can see how it actually works with like the proximity, hover, and like when somebody actually clicks it, what happens, and all that stuff. I think that'd be a good one. It's going to involve a little code. So, fair warning. It's easy stuff though. In Animate, there's an actions wizard. It can go through and give you, like, you know, all the template code for small interactive things like this. Of course, if you're building a whole game or something, you're not going to be able to do that with code snippets or the action wizard or anything like that alone. You're going to need to know a bit more. But for, you know, generating a simple UI toggle with a tiny little micro animation in there, that's definitely something that you could do with the actions wizard. So we'll do that again someday. I don't know if it's next Thursday or if I'll do an impromptu stream before then, just to finish this up. But actually, I'll probably do a little stream before then, because it's only going to take like 30 minutes or so, maybe 20 minutes to do that. And then we'll have a little working toggle switch with a micro animation attached to it, which is pretty fun. All right. So I'm going to call it. Thanks for joining, everyone who joined me live, and anybody watching the replay. You know, I am generally streaming at 6 p.m. Pacific every Thursday night on all sorts of different things. I did Animate this week. I'll do something else next week. I'm not sure exactly what yet. I've got a list of things that I want to do. So I'll see you then. Thank you.